Hello guys, welcome to AnySwift TV. Our story starts off with a boy, Steven, panicking because his favorite ice cream got discontinued. He begins making love to the fridge so the workers allow him to take it home. He enters his house to see his family massacring baby animals inside. He goes close to one and nearly gets smoked. Then Garnet decides that they should go reunite the mother with her children. Steven asks if he can come along, but Pearl tells him it's too dangerous until he can use his powers, as she shows the little one the way to heaven. A monster enters the fridge where Steven sees more of his favorite ice cream inside. He excitingly eats it, then his gem suddenly begins to glow. They tell him to summon his weapon, but Steven doesn't know how. Pearl tells him that to activate his ability he needs to work hard and master his gem, while Amethyst gives him very helpful advice to just do it, but Garnet tells him that to summon his weapon he should open his third eye and channel the power of the universe into the Eye of Agamotto to become the Sorcery Supreme. Steven decides to recreate the events that activated his gem last time, but it doesn't work. They tell Steven it's okay and encourage him to do better, which leads to his gem activating and summoning a shield. 100 IQ Steven now thinks he summons his weapon by eating ice cream when the mother monster suddenly shows up to avenge her children. She tries to spray Gatorade on them, so the gems are forced to hide behind a rock. Steven throws a stone at the creature, then eats his ice cream, but nothing happens, so he runs away. The monster tries to unalive him but instead sends the fridge to mech heaven. Steven gets angry and gives the mother a shock of her life. Then the gems decides it's time to genocide the defenseless creature. He buries the ice cream wrapper and begins crying as all the gems surround him to give words of comfort. The next day Steven and Amethyst go into town where they see the Eye of Sauron in the sky. Pearl tells them that the eye is going to crash into the town and send everyone to the Holy Land. Garnet says that the only thing that can stop it is Steven's mom's light cannon, however they don't know where she kept it. Steven realizes that his dad may know where it is, but the gems doubt she would entrust it to him because, let's say like father like son. Steven goes to his dad's home and wakes him up. Greg comes out with a weapon of mass destruction and hugs Steven. He asks why he's here and Steven tells him that he's looking for the light cannon so they can defeat Sauron. Greg brings Steven to a storage unit and tells him to check inside. Steven walks through the junkyard and finds it hidden all the way at the back. They use a hillbilly rope to take out the item they need to protect their planet, then delicately place it in a wheelbarrow and drive it towards the gems. They reach the beach as Sauron decides he's done waiting, but the gems don't know how to activate the light cannon. Pearl realizes that Steven has his mom's gem, so Amethyst rubs him against it. The cannon begins to charge, so the crystal gems fire it in a majestic beam that takes the form of Steven's mom and ends Sauron's reign for good, but his remains scatter and rain down on the city, causing untold destruction. They celebrate their victory as Greg's home heads towards Atlantis while he tries to save it. The next day, 100 IQ Steven goes to ride his bike in wet sand. He tries to show it off to Connie, but he has a great fall instead. An earthquake suddenly occurs that causes a rock to break over her, but Steven saves her with a bubble. She asks how long the shield lasts, but Steven the kidnapper doesn't know how to undo it. They roll the bubble towards his home, but they are defeated by the Great Hill. Steven decides to ask Sadie for help while Lars shows off skills that'll make any girl tremble, but it doesn't break. They then head to the Great Demon King Onion to get his help, but even his powers can't break Steven's stalker bubble. 100 IQ Steven decides to go to the amusement park to get it shut down as he walks on the track and gets sent into the ocean. They begin rolling towards the beach as a huge animal passes over them and begins drilling into the earth, which causes them to fall further down into the trenches. Connie begins to panic and cries because she's surely gonna suffocate inside the bubble eventually, but Steven cheers her up by giving her a bracelet that she lost last year. Seeing that Steven sealed the deal, the wingman bubble pops, allowing them to swim to the surface, but the giant monster follows after them and begins chasing Connie for her bracelet. Seeing this, Steven takes it from her and makes the monster tie himself into a knot to make it become past tense. The crystal gems arrive, but Steven already smoked the creature, so they leave him to continue spitting mad game with Connie. The next day, the gems take Steven into the desert. They hear a monster in the distance and abandon Steven in the hot hellscape. Steven sees a monster in the distance, then begins to retreat but is stopped by a wall. He turns around to see a pink lion lying in front of him. 100 IQ Steven goes over and pets the vicious creature, but luckily the lion isn't Harambe and allows Steven to play with him. The gems arrive with Amethyst holding the sand monster. They see the lion, but Steven says he's tame, so the monster-killing gems leave him be and heads out. At home, Steven goes to the door and sees that the stalker lion followed him. Steven tries to play many games with him, but Lion is not a toy. He breaks into Steven's home and tries to take the sand monster, but 100 IQ Steven gets jealous and throws the creature who needs sand to activate onto the beach. Shikaku begins building a castle. Steven tried to temple run towards it but falls to his doom as Lion comes in clutch and uses Screech to huff and puff and blow the house down. The gems bubble the monster while Steven plays with his new Pokemon. Later on, Steven judges a game between Pearl and Amethyst. They begin arguing over the game, then start talking about someone called Opal. Steven asks who she is and Pearl explains that in times of need they can fuse to become a being called Opal. Garnet comes back and tells them she found the Heaven and Earth Beetle. She decides to go for the Earth Beetle and send the rest of the gem for the Heaven one. They walk up a mountain while Steven tries to convince them to fuse because all he wants to do is see them turn into a giant woman. They arrive at the peak of the mountain where they find the beetle's home, but it's not there. A giant bird flies up and eats lunch, then prepares for dessert. Steven finally convinces them to form Opal, but they fail and begin arguing again. Steven unwillingly enters the bird's stomach where he finds a goat eating the Heaven Beetle. The bird begins getting fisted as Opal saves Steven from doom and escapes with him. They combine their weapons into a light bow and uses it to genocide another species. Steven finally gets his wish, then they head home and complete their mission to combine the Heaven and Earth Beetle. The next day, Steven sits and eats ice cream as the gems return. He reveals that he won a mini golf game for each of them, but they are busy saving the world, so they leave him home alone. Steven starts playing a game until the next day when he reaches the end and gets a secret ending as the gems suddenly arrive. He tries to watch the ending, but the gems keep blocking his way, then Amethyst breaks the TV. Steven gets upset and wishes he had a place for himself when his gem begins glowing and opens his mom Rose's door. The gem warns him not to go inside, but tantrum Steven enters anyway. Inside the room, he finds that he can get whatever he wishes for, but Steven begins to get hungry and leaves the room to find no one. He heads to the donut shop, but the workers are acting weird. He follows them out back and finds that the town seems abandoned. He goes on the beach and begins to get surrounded by everyone. He finds his dad, then realizes that he's still inside the room and falls into an abyss. He begs to go back to the gems, then the room lets him outside. Steven apologizes for acting like a lil shit. They forgive him, then take him on a mission to destroy a communication tower. Amethyst tries to break it, but her damage stat is too low. Garnet decides to form Sugilite by fusing with Amethyst, but Pearl warns her that their fusion is unstable and tells Garnet to fuse with her instead. They begin their fusion ritual and Garnet opens to Amethyst, then they form Sugilite. The Barbie creates a wrecking ball and begins carelessly banging the base, causing Steven to get injured. Pearl takes him home and narrowly escapes, finding out if there's a gem heaven. Steven goes to the donut shop where he shows them his battle damage. He realizes that he's too soft and decides to start a gym with his father's equipment. Steven goes home and invites Pearl to be stronger like Sugilite, but she refuses. He goes down to his friends and inspires them to be strong in a real way and brings out their full potential. Steven goes home and sees Pearl panicking that Amethyst and Garnet still aren't home when they see Sugilite approaching in good form. She blames Pearl for leaving her stranded, then starts attacking like bees in a trap. Pearl tries to fight the fusion, but she gets hit with a combo attack. She begins to give up, but Steven is right by her side, then begins to encourage her to be strong in her own way. She begins taunting Sugilite and leads her to a mountain where she sends her to Pills and Potion Land. Pearl goes over and hugs them as they apologize for the trouble they caused while fused. The next day, Steven and Amethyst plays on the mountain where she accidentally falls down on a rock and cracks her gem. Garnet tells Steven that his mother had healing tears and since he has her gem he should be able to heal her. He tries to cry, but the tears won't come, so they decide to bring her to a healing spring instead. They find out that it's overgrown by thorns, so Pearl begins to panic and looks for a path. Amethyst tells Steven to self-harm so he can start crying, but she had to stop the plants from upping their KD, which causes her to crack to spread. Garnet makes her own entrance and enters, but the spring is dry. They go to unclog it while leaving Steven to protect Amethyst, but the plants begin attacking and they get surrounded. Steven begins to cry because they're about to meet Gem Jesus, but nothing happens. The fountain suddenly activates and all thorns begins to be dispelled. Pearl and Garnet come back, then reveal that they cleared the thorns that blocked the pipe, making Steven feel useless. He sits with Connie and tells her what happened. She takes his juice box and drinks from it and finds that her eyes are suddenly healed. They realize that Steven has healing spit, so he goes to tell the gems. At home, Steven talks with Connie and she tells him about school. He asks Pearl about what a school is, but she doesn't know either, so she gives him a magical mirror that is supposed to have infinite knowledge, but it seems to be broken. He explores the town as the mirror begins communicating with him by stitching together voices of past recordings. He goes home to show the gems, but Pearl says that the mirror shouldn't have free will and tries to take it from him. But stupid Steven hits Garnet, then runs away. He hides behind a rock as the mirror tells him to take out the gem on the back of it. Lapis appears from the gem and thanks Steven as the crystal gems arrive to confront her, but she gives them the hand and says she won't ever be a prisoner again before she moses the sea to escape. They ground Steven for disobeying orders when Greg pops in and tells them that the ocean is gone. Everyone decides to go on a journey to return the water to the earth. Steven is confused about why they have to fight another gem, but Pearl explains that all the monsters they fight are all gems that have become corrupted by the diamonds. They arrive at Lapis Water Palace. She tells them to go away and sends out clones of the gems to protect her. The gem decides to start to fight their mirror selves. Garnet auras her and gets a headshot while Amethyst throws rocks at her clone. Pearl slays her trouble but makes it double. Steven tries to protect the world from devastation but fails and has to be saved by Greg. He tells Lapis to surrender now or prepare to fight as he summons his shield and dispel all the clones in the area. He enters the ocean and heads up to see Lapis. He asks why she did this and she tells him that she's using the water as a bridge to get home because her gem is cracked. Steven tells her he can fix it and wets on her back to repair her gem. She flies into space as the ocean falls back to Earth, but Lion comes in clutch and rescues Steven from having the world dropped on him. They go back home and everyone begins congratulating Steven for fixing the problem that he caused. He visits his dad and have a competition to see who can launch more seeds, with Steven winning and is declared the god of spitting. The next day they awaken to a forest of watermelons that are all shaped like Steven. They don't know what to do with all the fruits, so Steven decides to sell his offsprings. After they're all gone, demon god King Onion comes to buy the last watermelon. Steven says no because the last child is the parent's favorite, but no one says no to a king and he lupins it. The melon starts moving on its own, then runs back to Steven. Realizing that his children are special, he goes around and collects all his young ones. He goes home and tells the gems, then they decide to massacre Steven's little ones while he watches, but quantity beats quality and they begin getting overwhelmed. Steven tries to keep the peace, but no one listens, so Steven's favorite punches him to draw all the aggro to him and sacrifices himself for the sins of melonkind. Steven scolds his offsprings for smoking their sibling, then sends the murder melons into the world to become someone else's problem. The next day, Steven eats with Lion by his side and wonders what kind of lunch his mom would have made him. He prepares Lion's bed, then Steven goes to sleep but awakens in a world where he can't breathe. He awakens to see a giant pussy sitting on his face. He goes back to sleep and awakens to the murder Lion trying to improve his KD. He puts Lion outside but can't bring himself to leave him there, so he enters Lion's mane where he finds a hill with mementos from his mother. Steven discovers an ancient device that is labeled towards him and he goes to the donut store to borrow their video displayer. The video plays and shows Greg on the beach talking to Rose. She begins telling Steven that this world is beautiful, but they are never going to meet because she will have to give up her physical form to become half of him, and every time he loves himself, that's also her loving him. Steven heads outside and returns home. The gems bring him to a flower field, but he gets allergies. They enter the warp gate where he sneezes and flies outside the beam and sees another warp beam. He tells the gems, but they don't believe him since they are the only ones who can warp, so Steven decides sleep is for the weak and stays up all night to guard the Bifrost. Pearl tells him nothing is out there and they decide to check all the warpers on Earth, but there's nothing suspicious about any of them. Steven sits at home watching the portal and finally begins believing that there's nothing in the warp when a bowling ball with legs crashes into his home and tries to use their gate, so he fights off the robot and holds it as the warper activates. He finds himself being jumped by many balls, then they push him outside. He accepts his fate and prepares to become a hashtag when Garnet comes in clutch to save his life. They arrive at the space warp to see the robots fixing the portal. It activates and a homeworld gem, Peridot, comes through, but she realizes that someone has been there and escapes. Pearl and Amethyst begin to panic, but Garnet wants all the smoke. The crystal gems try to train Steven in fusion, but nothing happens. Pearl begins to wonder if Steven can even fuse since he's half human, but Amethyst thinks Steven can do anything. He goes out and discusses it with Connie. She reveals that she is afraid of dancing, and Steven with the smooth moves takes her hand and leads her to the dance floor, then they form Stephanie. They show the gems, surprising everyone that he fused with a human. Pearl wants them to be cautious, but Garnet tells them to go out and have fun as their new being. They go around exploring their city but begins getting hungry, so they head to the donut shop where they abuse their pretty privilege to get free donuts. They eat on the bench when a dude comes by and invites them to a party. She takes the dance floor and does a Pearl, then transitions into a Garnet before doing her own thing. She looks around and begins to get a panic attack. A boy tries to dance with them, but they run away. He follows Stephanie and tries to dance, but she refuses him. He begins insisting, so she decides to go on the floor and have a seizure before break dancing the having fun. Steven goes home and sees the gems returning with all of Peridot's balls. He asks why gems from their homeworld are dangerous. Pearl explains that gems are a species that uses planets to progress their civilization at the cost of all the lives on it. Stephen compares them to his book. Then he and Amethyst decide to go on a road trip together. A raccoon runs Stephen's pockets and he decides he wants to go home because he's hungry. Amethyst says she wants to show him where she was born before they go. The duo walks through the kindergarten while Amethyst shows him around. She carries Stephen to the hole she spawned from when Pearl suddenly arrives and scolds Amethyst for bringing him there. Amethyst reveals that a kindergarten is a place where Homeworld grew gems to destroy the planet. Pearl tries to stop her, but she begins a fight, then uses rollout, but Pearl uses Ultra Instincts to easily defeat her. Amethyst says she didn't ask to be born and runs away to her rock womb. Pearl goes in and tells her that she isn't a mistake, then explains that she is the only good thing to have come from the kindergarten. She earns a hug from Amethyst, then they return home. In the morning, Stephen sits on the beach with Connie when a giant bowling ball falls from the sky. The gem changes its living status, then Amethyst bathes in its blood. Another one falls from the heavens and they make it past tense. Another one falls to Earth, and in a rare display of intelligence, Stephen tells them to follow the robot instead of destroying it. They ride their mount to the kindergarten, then head down to a secret base. The ball activates a computer that reveals Peridot on it. Garnet makes a plan to stealthily take out the power source when Special Stephen goes and tries to talk to her. Peridot gives him the hand, forcing the gems to reveal themselves to her. She is surprised that the crystal gems are still alive and leaves to report it to her superiors. The gems decide to go on an old battlefield for new weapons. Lion wanders the area and finds Rose's scabbard. Pearl takes it and begins reminiscing about the old times when she fought beside Rose. They head home with Pearl still embracing the scabbard. Stephen asks what kind of a person his mom was and she describes her as a flawless goddess. She gives Stephen the sword and they decide to go on a trip together to find the sword for the scabbard. She carries Stephen to Rose's secret armory, but Stephen says he has already been there with Lion. He goes on the platform and looks through many weapons but can't find the sword. Pearl shows him what it looks like and he goes home to pull it from Lion's mane. They realize that the lion was Rose's pet, but somehow Pearl didn't know about it. She begins to freak out because Rose was keeping secrets from her and then runs away as Stephen follows her on the lion, but she tells him to keep the beast away from her. Stephen leaves the teleporting lion to continue the chase on foot and makes a jump that should have ended the series, but he's saved by a root. He climbs up and sees Pearl crying. She asks Stephen if he has any of Rose's memory, then brings up a projection of Rose when the war started. She explains that everything she did was because of Rose and without her she is now lost. Stephen comforts her, then she returns the completed sword to Lion and watches Stephen magic trick before telling him of the battles they fought while riding home together. In the night, Stephen listens to his dad playing music when they suddenly hear a loud sound coming from the house. The gems try many elaborate methods to silence it until Garnet comes up with a device to soundproof the area. The gems realize that someone is trying to send them a message, but because the signal is too advanced they can't pick it up. Stephen tells them that his dad is an audio god and they head over there for help. He tries his best to make the signal clearer, but right as he's about to crack it his van battery becomes a toaster. They thank Greg for trying and jump away. Greg sits disappointed that he couldn't be of use when Stephen uses 100% of his brain and realizes that the signal may be visual. Greg tries to make the signal clear again and finds that it's Lapis. She tells them that Peridot is coming to Earth with reinforcements and to not fight back since Homeworld's technology has gotten far more advanced. The gems begin to freak out, but Garnet calms them, then thanks Greg for his help. Stephen and Amethyst walk home, but all the windows around them suddenly get shattered. They look into the sky and see the master hand approaching. The gems fire the light cannon at the hand, but it has no effect. They decide to evacuate everyone, but Stephen doesn't want to go. Garnet tells him he must leave so he can go out and lead the citizens like how his mother led the gems. They drive away from the town and Stephen wonders if Peridot can come to like Earth like the crystal gems. Greg reveals that all the other gems are world conquerors, but when his mom arrived on Earth, Rose liked the people, so she betrayed her race and drove them off the planet at a high cost, but she would have been wiped out too if it wasn't for her shield that allowed her to save 5 of her friends. Stephen realizes that he has his mom's shield and convinces his dad to let him go back. He tells Stephen to be careful, then he takes the teleporting lion to reach the battlefield and sees Opal failing to defeat Master Hand. The hand lands on the beach and Peridot emerges along with the gem killer Jasper holding Lapis as a prisoner. She lands on the planet but is disappointed by what's left of Rose's army. They blast them with the ship, but Stephen defends his family. Jasper recognizes the shield and begins to panic at first, but she realizes that the form Rose has taken is much weaker than she was and decides to take Stephen prisoner. Garnet comes in to protect him, but Jasper uses a destabilizer to break her apart, then goes over to Steven and knocks some sense into him. Steven awakens in a gem cell, but he's half human so he can just pass through it. He walks down the hall, then finds Ruby and frees her. They continue down to search where they see Lapis in her cell. Steven tries to save her, but she tells him to leave her inside because Homeworld is too strong to fight against. He leaves her and wanders the ship until he finds Sapphire and set her free. Ruby and Sapphire begin embracing each other, then spin to make Garnet. They hear Jasper approaching and she tells Steven to free the rest of the gems while she fights her. Jasper comes and is disgusted that they have to fuse to fight her. She runs at Garnet with her weapon, but she disarms Jasper and does a taunt before hitting her with a 3-piece combo followed by an up air and finishes the fight with a stage fatality. While Steven goes around freeing everyone and taking control of the ship, but Garnet's explosion causes the ship to lose control, so they crash land onto the planet while being protected by Steven's bubble. Homeland's top smoker Jasper comes out of the rubble and says that Garnet only won because she's a fusion. She sees Lapis and convinces her to fuse and form Malachite. She wields the power of the ocean, but the water begins chaining them as Lapis decides she's done being a taker and is going to be a giver before pulling the fusion to the bottom of the ocean to suffer in the cold and dark forever. Greg arrives in his van, then Steven tells his father what happened, which causes him to have a panic attack. Connie calls him, but he doesn't want to worry her, so he decides to ghost her. She comes to his home, but Steven dodges her like child support. She sees him running away and follows after him. He breaks up with her over a text, but she tells him to say it to her face. He stands up and tries, but he can't bring himself to say it. He tells her that he didn't want her to worry, then explains to Connie everything that happened. She tells him that she wants to be a part of his universe, then Greg picks them up and drives home. Steven goes to Pearl and asks for her to train Connie. She rejects him, but Connie tells Pearl that all she wants to do is fight by Steven's side and protect him, then she accepts. At first, Pearl begins giving her actual lessons and points to drastically improve her sword skills, but after a while, she begins to gaslight Connie into becoming a meat shield to serve and go to heaven for Steven. He talks with the other gems about her training, and Garnet explains that when Pearl served Rose, she would sacrifice her physical form countless times to protect her. Steven rushes in to stop the indoctrination when he meets a hologram Pearl, but he's saved by Connie. She tells him that her life is nothing compared to his, so she will protect him, but he says that he also wants to protect her. They begin fighting together and defeat all the Hollow Pearls until the real Pearl shows up and easily defeats both of them. She tells Connie that in a real battle Steven should never be in danger because he's too important, but he tells Pearl that he wants to fight alongside Connie. Pearl begins projecting her relationship with Rose onto Steven and Connie, then decides to take a break. They go over and comforts Pearl, then she accepts that them fighting together is stronger than just Connie fighting alone. The next day, Garnet realizes that Peridot might still be trying to activate the drills at the kindergarten to create an army of gems. The crystal gem heads there and split up to explore. Steven finds Peridot coming from a basement. She asks him if he's there alone. Steven's mind is telling him no, but his body is saying yes. The crystal gems chases after her, then she begins to fly, but Garnet grabs Steven to check out what she was doing. They see many cylinders sticking out of the wall and find shattered gems that were forcefully fused together. To Garnet's disgust, a giant forced fusion forms and attacks her. She reveals that all these fusions were crystal gems that got smoked in the war, and this is how Homeworld punished them. Then she poofs it. The crystal gems returns and reveal the lost Peridot, so they decide to search the ocean for Lapis and Jasper the Destroyer, but they begin getting tired and Garnet takes them home, then goes to continue searching. Steven falls asleep, but he finds Lapis at the door. She tells him to leave because she's slowly losing control and needs to concentrate. He wakes up, then tells Pearl what happened. She says Steven is using his dreams to communicate with Lapis mentally, so he decides to sleep and find her location. Steven finds Lapis holding down her fusion with the weight of the ocean. He asks for her location, but Jasper takes control, then crawls to Steven when hit a lick. Lapis comes back and return her to the trenches. She tells Steven to leave and transforms into Malachite to return him to his body. Garnet comes back and Steven tells her what happened, but she tells him not to worry, then sleeps like a boss. Steven and Amethyst sits and watches TV when Lapis suddenly comes on the screen and begins sending a message for help on every signal. Garnet realized she fixed the tower Sugilite destroyed. Amethyst wants to fuse again, but Garnet refuses because the last time they were feeling themselves too much. She asks Pearl to fuse and Garnet proves that she's the dumb in every relationship when they form Sardonic. They fuse their weapons to form a hammer and begin precisely hitting the weak points of the tower to make it collapse. They celebrate their accomplishment, then head back to continue their show. The signal comes back online as Pearl comes home and they go back to play Jenga again. Steven notices that Amethyst feels jealous that she has nothing to do, so they decide to stake out the area to capture Peridot. He sees someone fixing the tower and realizes that Pearl was the one who repaired the tower. They go back home and find the signal back online. The gems head back, but before they can form sardonic, they confront Pearl about what she did. Garnet is disgusted that Pearl lied to her so she can hit. Pearl says she just wanted to win battles with her, but Garnet wants to end this moment for life, so they form Sujilite and demolish the building, then heads home with Garnet now ignoring Pearl's existence. They warp to Peridot's location. Pearl rushes in only to get used as a weapon. The gems do a team ultimate to take her down, but Pearl gets in the way again, which leads to her escaping. They return home where Pearl apologizes and goes back to track Peridot's location. The gems warp to her coordinates, then Pearl runs inside the spaceship. Peridot comes on a screen and asks if they're ready to play a game before activating lasers to rain down on them, but Steven always keeps his umbrella close. They escape to the next room and run from more traps until Steven and Amethyst get separated from Garnet and Pearl. She apologizes to Garnet and tells her that she's going to catch Peridot to make it up to her. Garnet says that won't fix their relationship. She tells Garnet that pearls are useless on their own and only when they're together does she feel powerful, but Garnet reveals that she just pretends to be strong because the team needs her to be, and tell her she's strong in her own way. They form sardonic and burst out of the trap, then go to battle Peridot. She uses her hands to fly away, but Steven jumps on her, then begins to pull her down. Peridot detaches her legs and escapes again. They go home and Steven gets ready to go to bed when Peridot comes in and Solid snakes him to the warp portal. She tells him to fix the space portal like he did Lapis's gem, and Special Steven actually tries to repair it. But luckily, he can't heal machines. The crystal gem shows up and use their team ultimate and back her into a corner. Peridot tries to tell them something, but Garnet smokes her. Steven wonders what she was trying to say and wishes to see her when Rose's room opens and takes him to where the bubble gems are kept. He activates Peridot and asks what she knows. She tells Steven that her mission was to check on the cluster inside the planet, then runs away into the living room where the crystal gems confront her. Peridot locks herself in the bathroom and tries to escape to no avail. They scold Steven for freeing her, but he tells them about the cluster. Garnet doesn't know what that is, so they decide to leave her on smoke. Steven gives Peridot her missing leg, then she lets him inside. He begins telling her about Earth items and says they will help her for information, but she refuses to tell them, so they decide to go out and look for knowledge themselves while leaving Steven to watch their captive. A storm begins to form and Peridot comes out of the bathroom thinking it's the cluster. Steven shows her that rain is harmless, then she decides to tell him about the cluster, but she says they need to head to the kindergarten to see it. They enter the not-so-secret basement and activates the computer, then Peridot tells Steven that the cluster is made up of millions of gem shards and when it takes form the Earth will be destroyed. They walk back home when many mutated gems starts to attack them, but the crystal gems arrives and saves the day, then scolds Steven for freeing Peridot again, but she steps forward and tells them about the cluster. They head to a farm and decide to build a drill so they can dig to the cluster. The gems begin to work together and build their machine while Peridot slowly starts to get along with the gems and see the beauty of the Earth. They finish the gem but need to go to the moon base to find the exact coordinates for the cluster, so they ride the teleporting lion to the fortress. Steven sees a mural and asks about them. Peridot tells him the diamonds are flawless goddesses that rule homeworld and all gems live to serve them. They head upstairs and finds a control panel where Steven sits in the diamond seat and activates the machine. Peridot uses the computer and locates the cluster, then begins searching the files and finds what homeworld planned for the Earth. She praises the ingenuity to the disgust of the other gems. They tell her that all organism would have been packed up, but she sees it as a small sacrifice, causing Garnet to smash the computer before leaving, but Peridot took something from the base as they head home. Steven sees Peridot with the device, then tricks her and takes it before locking her in a van. He shows the crystal gems and they realize that it is a communication device that connects to the diamonds. Peridot breaks out the van and takes the device, then runs away. They chase her in Amethyst and scores a takedown, and the gems begins jumping the robot, but Peridot escapes, then activates the transponder. Yellow Diamond asks about her mission. She tells the diamond that the ship was destroyed by a crash landing and says that she wants to deactivate the cluster because she thinks the Earth's resources can further their empire. Yellow tells Peridot that she doesn't care about resources, she just wants to see the Earth gone, but Peridot refuses to do it, then hangs up. The gems go over and celebrate as Lapis sits in a ball as she realizes that she's now a race traitor like them. Steven wakes up in the body of his melon child. He walks through the village, then attends a ceremony led by Elder Melon where everyone calls not it but Steven, so he gets chosen to be a great sacrifice to the now freed Malachite. Steven returns to his body and tells the gems what he saw. They decide to go have a look but leaves him behind, so he settles to take over another innocent melon's mind to see all the gems fuse. They tell Malachite that she is outnumbered, but she's got the home field advantage. The gems try their best to fight her, but Malachite is just too powerful. Stephen goes to convince his offsprings to leave their homes and families behind to help in the fight against Malachite. They begin using all they have to overwhelm them and give the gems a chance to defeat her with an up air followed by their final smash. The gems go over and thank the melons for their help, but the cluster begins to form, so they tell Stephen to head to his real body and stop it. Stephen returns and tell Peridot what happened, then they enter the drill and begin heading toward the cluster. They travel down the earth until they reach the formation. Peridot begins to drill it, but it somehow causes pain to Stephen. He tells her to continue as he feels unimaginable pain before passing out. He wakes up in the mind of the cluster. They want to take form and feel whole again, but Stephen convinces them that they don't have to fuse to be whole, but instead, they can chill with each other. They begin being forced to form as Stephen tries to bubble them, but they're too many. He returns to his body and sees that the shards started bubbling themselves. Then he uses his godlike powers to flawlessly bubble all of them at once. They go up and see the gems holding Lapis, then tells them what happened. In the night, Stephen goes to check on her and sees Lapis leaving. He says goodbye, then she flies away. In the morning, Peridot decides to stay on the farm as the rest of the gems go home. Stephen looks for Lurking Lion but only finds lonely Lapis sitting on a silo. He goes up and wonders why she's still there. She tells Stephen that she has no home to go back to, so they decide to head out and search for a place for her to live. They travel to many locations until Lapis sees the space warp. She tells Stephen that this is where she was when she got poofed and placed into a mirror by Homeworld, but when the crystal gems won the war they abandoned her to suffer alone until Pearl found her. They decide to go back home as Stephen tells her that she is no longer a prisoner, so she is free to explore the world as much as she likes. Lapis decides that she wants to stay on the barn, but she's confused as why Peridot is there. They begin fighting over the barn, so Stephen decides to divide it in half, but Lapis doesn't want Peridot as a roommate because she kept her prisoner. She tells Lapis that she has changed, but Lapis doesn't care and flies away. Peridot says she needs to make Lapis believe her. Stephen comes up with an idea to surprise her with a pool built by Peridot, but she points out that she was imprisoned under the sea while trying to hold back Jasper, so she's taking a break from water. Peridot decides to give her a recorder as a present, but the traumatized hateful emo bitch breaks it and tells Peridot to leave the barn. Stephen scolds her for being mean as Peridot begins running back because a gem ship started chasing her. They play hide and seek, but the ship is a good seeker. Never lacking, Lapis steps up and reminds them why she's the strongest as the crystal gems arrive. Peridot walks away, but Lapis begins talking to her when a ruby suddenly comes out of the ship. Garnet diffuses and sends Ruby to invade their ranks. They wonder what's inside the barn, so she goes to get Stephen and tells them it's filled with humans. The Ruby asks for Jasper, so Stephen tells her that she is on Neptune. They put no stat points in intelligence, so the Rubies believed him and enter their ship to fly towards Neptune. Stephen goes to his dad, where Greg reveals that one of his songs took off, so now he caught the bag and is stacking paper. He decides to bring Stephen on a vacation, but Stephen decides to bring Pearl along. They go to a hotel and start flexing on the staff and let them carry the group to the bar, where they begin feeling themselves. Greg tries to dance with Pearl, but she says no and leaves to the room. Pearl says that she was fine when Rose dated other people, but when Greg came into the picture for the first time, she chose someone over her, and to make it worse, she gave up her life to bring Stephen into the world. She flexes her balance and wonders why she can't move on from grieving her passing. She walks back in to see that everyone is now awake when Greg, feeling bad for cucking Pearl, leaves the room. He apologizes for taking her girl, but they recall that Rose always did what she wanted. They begin dancing and reminisce about their past with her. Then they get ready to leave and goes home, with their relationship now being closer. Stephen has daddy's money and go to Peridot and gives her a tablet. She attaches it to her arm, then Amethyst arrives and takes them to an amusement park where Stephen and Amethyst abuses their shapeshifting abilities so they can win prizes. Peridot gets jealous of their powers, so they try to teach her how to do it, but she reveals that because Homeworld is lacking resources, newer gems like her don't have powers. Amethyst tells her she's fine the way she is, but Peridot ignores her lies. She takes Peridot's tablets and tries to toss it, but she awakens an ability and brings it back to her. Realizing she now has powers, she uses it to cheat and gets a giant teddy before going home. The next day, Stephen invites Lapis to go on a boat trip with Greg to get rid of her fear of water. They explore the open sea, then Greg tries to teach them how to fish when a giant creature pulls on the line that causes the rod to break. Something suddenly hits the boat, which sends the motor to heaven and traps them on the sea with land-loving Lapis. She tells Stephen that she misses being fused because she was Malachite for months when Jasper the Harasser comes on board. Stephen tries to protect her, but Jasper's hand is rated E for everyone. She tells Lapis to fuse with her and become a god, but Lapis refuses because their relationship was unhealthy. She blames Stephen for taking Lapis away, then she reminds everyone why she's the strongest gem. They fly home on Lapis as the boat starts to sail with the fishes. The gems decide to go smoke top up Jasper while Steven goes to train with Connie. A giant monster suddenly comes on the beach and heads for Steven, but Amethyst uses her whip to strangle the creature until it flatlines. Jasper the Conqueror suddenly comes out the sea riding another monster. Amethyst decides to 1v1 her, but she stands no chance against the gem killer as she becomes a punching bag. Jasper proofs Amethyst and tries to shatter her, but Steven and Connie form Stevanie, then begin styling on her with Lion. They joust against each other with Jasper losing. Amethyst reforms to see Stevanie putting Jasper on her knees and forces her to retreat into the ocean. Then she congratulates them for winning but begins to feel useless. The gems come back and Steven tells them about what happened, then Pearl makes him continue training, but he goes to Amethyst and invites her to train with him. Pearl starts by training their speed, but Steven is faster than Amethyst. She teaches them how to dodge, but Steven has the moves like Jagger. Pearl decides their last test will be a fight against her clones. Amethyst defeats one while Steven uses his giant shield to Captain America the rest and claims the day's victory. Steven sees that Amethyst is feeling down, so he invites her to play games and makes her win. She realized what Steven did and says that Steven is now stronger than her, but he disagrees, so they decide to have a battle to see who is worse. Amethyst sonics around Steven and ties him up, but he uses his bubble to break free. She throws him into a pillar and he activates a new ability, then comes out of his bubble to give her equal rights before saving her life. Both of them are now exhausted and try to finish the fight with the last blow, but they miss the mark. Amethyst says she will never match Jasper, but Steven points out that he will never match Rose. They realize that both of them are struggling and squashes the beef as Pearl comes in and scolds them for destroying the arena. Later on, the gems sit and play games when Leono starts assaulting Steven's clothes. He decides to put it in Lion's mane, but accidentally frees a gem that's inside. The gem begins to glow and Bismuth takes form. Steven brings her out and Pearl jump into her arms and said they believed she was shattered in the war. Garnet explains that Bismuth was one of the original crystal gems from 50 years ago. She asks where Rose is and Steven tells her what happened, then she asks where the rest of the crystal gems are. They bring her to the old battlefield and reveal that they are the only ones who are left. Bismuth gets angry and decides that from now on they will fight back against Homeworld. They head to a volcano. She leads them to her old base, then begins building weapons and gives out free upgrades to everyone. They begin showing Bismuth how the world has changed, then call it a day. In the night, Bismuth asks Steven about his weapons. He shows her his shield and Rose's sword, then she reveals to Steven that she built the sword after she was inspired by the flawless goddess to be whatever she wanted to be. Steven tells her that he doesn't think he can ever live up to her, but Bismuth tells him that he should be like himself and decides to give him a weapon. She brings him to the forge and reveals a weapon that would have won the war. She shows him that it's made to not poof gems, but to shatter them completely, and gives it to Steven. He refuses to use the weapon because he doesn't want to stoop to Homeworld's level and tells her no one's going to equip it. Bismuth says that Rose said the same before she poofed and trapped her inside Lion. She begins to attack Steven while saying that if Rose used this weapon, not only would they have won the war, but they could have conquered Homeworld too. He pushes her away and begin floating, but she throws a golem at him, but Steven has the reverse Uno card to send it back. He tells Bismuth to stop and she asks him to shatter her. Steven refuses, so she attacks and forces him to use the sword. She says that Rose didn't care enough to even tell the crystal gems what happened to her, but Steven says he will tell them and Bismuth smiles as she poofs away. Steven returns with a bubbled Bismuth and tells them what occurred. Days later, Steven and Amethyst goes to visit the barn. They see Lapis and Peridot watching television. They show them all the changes they've made and play music for them, but Amethyst isn't amused because she wants to go and train to beat Jasper. Peridot tells her that Jasper was also born on Earth, so they go to visit Jasper's kindergarten. They walk around until they come up on a huge hole, but it's perfect in every way, making Amethyst feel inferior. They find many holes containing corrupted gems. When Pokemon Master Jasper shows herself, Amethyst tries to Assassin Creed her, but Jasper knows she is there and says that they are abominations because Amethyst is misshapen and Rose is now Steven. Amethyst wants the one-on-one and attacks Jasper, but she eats all her attacks and begins to punish her. Steven throws his shield to separate the fight and tells Amethyst that he wants to help her, then they fuse to form Smoky Quartz. They summon their yo-yo and proves that fusions are Jasper's kryptonite. In an act of desperation, Jasper chooses to fuse with a corrupted gem, but she's still no match for them. She unfuses and accepts her defeat as she begins to get corrupted. Special Steven wants to help the enemy who tried to unalive him, but Jasper refuses and chose to be fully corrupted because of what Rose did to Pink Diamond. Peridot comes in clutch and backstabs her, then Amethyst goes over and bubbles Jasper. They head home and see that the rubies have returned from Neptune. Steven asks why they've returned and they ask for Jasper, then Amethyst transforms to pretend to be her. Ruby goes over and tries to take her back to Homeworld, but Amethyst says that she has to stay on Earth to keep the crystal gems as her prisoner, so Ruby decides to go to the moon base to report what she accomplished. They head inside the base and discuss what happened to Pink Diamond. They reveal that Earth was a part of Pink's colony until Rose started a rebellion and shattered her diamond. Steven denies that his mother smoked someone, but they continue up and realize that the control panel is broken. Then Amethyst convinces the Rubies to go back to Homeworld without them and report that she captured the gems. They begin to leave, but Amethyst couldn't hold the form any longer. They realize that the gems tricked them again and fuse into a giant ruby. Quick thinking, Steven opens the moon door and pushes them into the dark and cold vacuum of space, but they decide to take him with them. He floats in a bubble in the vast nothingness, accompanied by Red Eye Ruby. She tells Steven that all she wanted to do was see the leader of the rebellion with her own eyes, but Steven reveals that Rose turned into him, but Ruby doesn't believe him. They float into an asteroid belt and turn into a ping pong ball. Ruby gets hit by one, so Steven saves her, then fixes their cracked gem. Ruby realizes that Steven is Rose and immediately tries to send him to Gem Heaven, but Steven is the landlord, so he evicts her into space to float for all eternity. The crystal gems find Steven in Ruby's ship and start to comfort him about what happened. He asks why his mom smoked Pink Diamond, and Garnet explains that because the Earth was Pink's planet, she had to disappear in order to win the war. Steven heads to sleep and gets a vision of a location. He tells Connie about it and she finds it in a book. Steven asks the gems about it, but they refuse to tell him, so he decides to find it himself. He goes to his father and asks for help, so Fat Wallet Greg flies them toward the location. As they get closer to the place, Steven begins crying. They reach a blue spaceship and see someone in a hood talking about Pink Diamond. The Blue Pearl hears them, so Greg decides to sacrifice himself to the mysterious woman who was revealed to be Blue Diamond, who's grieving for the loss of her younger sister. She decides to take Greg as a memento to Pink's planet. Steven tries to chase after her, but Garnet comes and stops him. She apologizes to Steven for not coming with them and tells him that they're going to get Greg back. Pearl tells them that Blue had a human zoo, and that's where she might be taking him. They take the Ruby ship, then activate the hyperdrive and speed off until they reach the zoo. The gems enter the gates, but they see securities guarding the entrance, so Garnet defuses and makes a plan to use Steven as a prisoner to get inside. They approach the guards and see the leader, who lets them in because Sapphire is high-ranked. She takes them to the door where Sapphire distracts her and leaves them to free Greg, but they can't get the door open. A guard comes and reports that Blue Diamond is on her way to the ship, then brings Steven to a tube where they change his clothes and release him into the zoo. He sees his father and they embrace each other. Greg tells them that the other humans here have it pretty good, as a voice tells them when to eat, bathe, and even sleep. At night, Steven explores with Greg and finds the door. The humans tells them that the door only opens when someone gets hurt, so Steven gives his father the hands, but no one comes to help. The voice suddenly calls them for a choosing ceremony. They head there and finds the voice telling people who to couple with. The voice chooses Greg with someone, but he tells them that they should be able to pick anyone they want to be with. The humans all choose Greg, but he rejects them and they all begin to cry. He runs away and hides as the guards come to calm the humans down. Seeing their chance, they run towards the door, but get captured by a guard. They take them to Amethyst and see her having fun with her kind. The leader comes back and sends them all to greet Blue Diamond. Amethyst tells them to run while everyone is distracted, and they escape to a room with many bubbled gems. Blue Diamond comes in with Yellow Diamond behind her. She tells Blue to destroy all the bubbled rose quartz, but she refuses because they are the only thing left of Pink's creation. Yellow reminds her that one of the roses betrayed and shattered her, then begins to grieve for Pink when Ruby and Sapphire suddenly enters the room. She begins to freeze up, but after Ruby comforts her, she makes up a lie and is allowed to leave with Greg and Steven sneaking out with them. They Solid Snake behind the leader as she gets wet over the fact that 2 diamonds came to her zoo. She notices that humans escaped and prepares to fight. They turn back into Garnet and easily defeat her. She threatens to tell the diamonds, but Pearl points out that if she tells them she failed, she will be shattered. Then they escape back to Earth. Steven sits at home and begins to wonder for what reason Rose had him. Lion suddenly spits out a key, but Steven doesn't know what it's for. He goes to many locations that previously belonged to Rose, but finds nothing that the key can fit in. Lion takes him to the desert and carries Steven to Rose's old ship. He opens the door and finds that this is where she kept her trash, but Steven finds a tape that might hold his destiny. Lion takes him to his dad and he realizes that it's just a copy of his other tape. Steven asks his dad why he was made, and he explains that he wasn't born with a reason, he was just born to be Steven. Hearing this, Steven accepts and embraces his father. Steven goes home and waits for a package with Amethyst, but their mailman didn't arrive, so Steven heads into town to find him and realizes that many people seem to be missing from the city. He meets a little gem who asks Steven for my dad, but he says no, so she flies away. He goes to the crystal gems and reports to them. Then they decide to split up to go look for the missing citizens. Connie and Steven search the forest where they encounter the lil gem again. Connie begins talking to the gem and she flies up and calls an abomination fused with all the missing people to her. It kidnaps her, causing Steven to attack, but Lil Blue knocks him out and leaves with all his friends. He runs home and tells the gems, but Connie sends him a picture of her location, so they head out to find her. Steven calls Connie's phone and finds it on the floor when the homeworld gems suddenly confronts the crystal gems. They ask Steven for my dad and he realizes that the people they're kidnapping are from the report Peridot sent when they first met. They threaten to start unaliving the captives, so he steps up and claims to be my dad. They take Steven then head into the ship where he decides to free everyone. The giant attacks him, but he blocks the blows with his shield. The gem takes up Lars' girlfriend, but he chooses life and runs away before she frees herself. They open the door and see the gem's fusion holding the ship. Everyone begins jumping into the water, but they get frozen by Lil Blue. Steven tells her that he is Rose. The gems begin to protest, but he decides to leave and save everyone. They reveal that Lars is still on the ship, but Steven says that this wasn't a part of the deal, but what is he gonna do about it? Lars blames Steven for this happening to him, but he remembers that he used his girlfriend as a meat shield so he could get away. The engine suddenly malfunctions, so the fusion goes over to fix it. Steven makes a plan to grab one of the destabilizers with Lars' pants. He tries to do it, but he's too scared to try and fight back. Steven reveals that he's scared as well because he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. Lars says we're all in this together, and they decide to work together to make it off the ship. The fusions begins to cry and reveals that she admires their courage and decides to help them, but Lil Blue comes in and realizes what she tried to do and breaks the ship. The giant grabs the destabilizer and pins her to the wall, but Lil Blue tells her that if she betrays the diamond she will be shattered. Then the fusion submits to her command. They carry Steven and Lars onto Homeworld, then separate them into different rooms. Steven sits in his chamber and waits for his punishment when a gem suddenly walks in and tells him that he's his lawyer. She begins telling Steven what to not say in his case of shattering a diamond. Then they head to the trial. The diamonds arrive with Yellow wanting to shatter Steven because he's ugly, but Blue wants to have a trial so she can make him suffer. The diamond's lawyer starts off by calling Lars to the trial and says that Rose turned on her own kind and shatter her creator to protect the physically challenged low IQ humans. She then calls an eyewitness to the stand who tells the court that war criminal Steven is really race traitor Rose who threw her into space to suffer. Steven's lawyer starts to fumble the bag, so he just admits to being guilty of shattering Pink Diamond and accepts all punishments if they release Lars. Blue asks how he did it, then Steven makes up a story that gets some details wrong and causing Blue to feel pain. They call a recess and the lawyer realizes that they want Steven to explain because it doesn't make sense that Rose could shatter Pink. She goes back to court and Steven's lawyer begins by asking how Rose could even shatter Pink Diamond. She brings in Blue Diamond's ship, then points out that there is no way that the leader of the rebellion could bypass all her guards and get close enough to assassinate Pink with not even her Pearl noticing the threat. She goes on to speculate that the only way Rose could have possibly get close enough to shatter Pink is if a diamond betrayed her. Yellow get enraged and poofs the lawyers on the spot while Steven takes the chance to escape with Lars to fly away. They crash the craft in the slums and begin to do the race. A Robocop comes by and begins scanning things, so they run as fast as they can. Lars decides that he's tired of being scared when a voice suddenly calls them into a hole where they find many special gems living inside a cave system. Lars gets scared by their unique features, but Steven is used to seeing ugly, so he just asks why they are hidden in the cave. They tell Steven that they're all defective gems, so if the robot finds them they will be shattered. The robot follows them down the hole and begins to search for everyone. It's about to scan one of the gems, but Lars steps up and distracts the droid, but when he gets scanned nothing happens because he has no gem. One of the Robocops scans another gem, but Lars manages to save her. He begins to hold them back and protect everyone single-handedly, but one of them explodes and sends him into a rock. Steven goes over to Lars and realizes he had a warrior's death. He cries over him and raises him from the grave, but he's now pink with a cool scar. Steven hugs him and apologizes for allowing Lars to become a hashtag. Lars begins freaking out that he just got brought back, but there's no time to wait as the special gems have to block the entrance so the robots can't come inside. Steven realizes that he's like Lion and touches his hair and sees that it's a portal. He goes inside Lars' hair and finds that it connects to Lion's, so he walks through and goes back to Earth. He finds the place abandoned, so he just grabs some food then heads back to Lars. He heads back and tries to pull Lars through the portal, but he can't suck himself. He tells everyone to just leave him and go back home, but they refuse to because they owe him for saving their lives. Lars tells Steven that he has to go back and forces him home to the gems. He sees Pearl panicking and goes for a group hug. Steven leaves with Connie and tells her about what happened. She scolds him for sacrificing himself for everyone because she believed that if they worked together they could have won against the homeworld gems. Steven says that everything turned out fine, so he was right to do it, but Connie ignores this fact and takes his pet teleporting lion that his mom left to take care of him and leaves. Steven tries to call her multiple times, but she begins to ghost him. He gets a call from Peridot and he tells them about what happened with the diamonds. Lapis begins panicking and decides to leave Earth, but Peridot wants to stay. Steven tells her that the diamonds are looking for him at homeworld, so the Earth is safe. Lapis says it's better to be safe than sorry, but Peridot says she doesn't want to leave the barn, so Lapis reminds us she's the strongest gem and rips it out the Earth to carry it with them. Peridot confesses that she doesn't want to leave the Earth, but to defend it if the time comes. Lapis accepts her decision to stay, but says she'll never be caught up in another war and takes their home to space with her. Peridot moves back into the bathroom at Steven's home and they begin to wonder why they always lose stuff in the divorce settlement. Steven begins putting up missing flyers of Lion when a boy comes and invites Stephanie to the party. Steven explains that he needs Connie to form that fusion, but he said that he already invited her. He goes to the party and sees his traitorous pussycat with his ex-girlfriend. Steven doesn't know how to fix this, so the boy dresses Steven and parties with him to make Connie feel jealous, but spotting a moment of weakness the boy sends over Steven to seal the deal. Steven goes to Connie and spits mad game, then leave. She runs over to him and asks why Steven isn't talking to her even though she ghosted him, but Steven has no self-respect and goes over to her to listen to her excuses before apologizes for sacrificing himself to save all his friends. Seeing that Steven's down bad, she decides to take him back and allows him to get on his lion so they can leave the party. The next day, Steven and Connie gets ready to visit Lars in the stars. They see him in the middle of a space mission. Steven asks Lars where he got all this drip and he says that he stole them after he escaped from the cave. The alert comes on warning of incoming danger, so Steven and Connie form Stephanie. A huge ship comes in front of them and tells the off-colors to return the ship they stole, or prepare to meet Jesus, but Lars realizes that if she wanted to send them to Gem Heaven they would already be gone and calls her bluff. The gem shoots at the ship but misses the mark, so Lars sends Stephanie to go out and destroy the enemy Star Destroyer. They drive Lars' jet into space and begin destroying the enemy's weapon system, but missiles begin chasing them. They get caught in an explosion and begin to go down towards a planet and has a crash landing. Stephanie goes around and explore the area where they find food and water to survive. They attempt to massacre a little one, but the mother comes and chases the predators until they reach a spacecraft where they set up a base inside and head to the dream world. They see Yellow Diamond as Connie's mom invading a planet. Stephanie asks for a planet for herself, so Yellow decides to contact the leader of Homeworld, White Diamond. She yells at Yellow that she wants one now because she is the only diamond who doesn't have a planet. Yellow says to act like an adult, so they go over and punches a mirror. Stephanie awakens, confused about their dream. They explore the ship and find it's the same one from her dream, then contact Lars and ask for help as Mother Bird arrives. Lars arrives and scares it away, then picks them up. Steven goes home and brings back Garnet to meet the other fusions. She compliments them, but they think she's making fun of their features. She says that she was just like them before she met Rose. Everyone is surprised because they see her as the anti-gem that turned on her own kind and destroyed her maker. Garnet tells the true story and explains that after Pink Diamond claimed Earth as her first colony, she rose an army to help colonize the planet, but one of them noticed that the planet was beautiful and fell in love with it. She began to preach about Earth's beauty and was sent directly to Pink Diamond. She tells Pink of the magnificence of the planet, but she laughed in her face and sent her back to work. Rose decided that she's going to raise an army, and seeing the rebellion, Pink called for Yellow and Blue to back her up. A great war began between the gems, but the crystal gems were losing, so Rose decided to face Pink Diamond directly and shatter her to end the fighting. But afterwards the other diamonds became enraged and launched an all-out assault on the Earth that wiped out all the gems present except for those Rose could protect. Steven tells Garnet about the dream she had and wonders why he has a connection to Pink Diamond, but Garnet says that his powers are unknown to her, so he should embrace them. Steven goes home and tries to sleep when one of the citizens wakes him up and tells him a barn is on the moon. Steven takes Lion and goes to the moon base. He heads upstairs and sees Lapis sitting there. He asks why she's still so close to Earth. She shows him that she has been stalking everyone on Earth from outer space. Steven asks why she doesn't come back, but Lapis says she can't after the way she left. Steven tries to convince her to go back to Earth, then goes to Sleepland. He dreams about Blue Diamond telling Pink that she asked for the planet, so she can't run away just because some gems started to rebel against her rule. Then he sees a Pearl carrying a sword to Pink Diamond and wakes up from a nightmare. He tells Lapis that he saw the diamonds, making her begin to panic and head to space to leave the Milky Way. Steven goes to Pearl and asks if she shattered Pink Diamond, but she suddenly places her hand over her mouth, then escapes into her room. He gets a text from her, but when he goes to Pearl she tells Steven that she didn't message him. Another message comes to his phone, then Pearl tells him that she is going to send him inside her gem to look for hers. He goes inside and sees a Pearl sorting all the items. She looks for the phone but cannot find it, so she sends him deeper inside. He sees a Pearl sitting by a rock crying and asks for the phone, but she only says that she's grieving because Rose is going to give up her form to make a baby. She sends Steven deeper inside where he finds himself on a battlefield to see the aftermath of the Diamond's combination attack. Then he goes deeper and he sees Rose after she shattered Pink Diamond. He walks towards her and realizes that Pearl took the shape of Rose to shatter Pink. The Pearlception continues and he sees Rose giving Pearl the sword to shatter Pink so they can be free of all their duties and enjoy the beauty of the planet. Rose transforms into her true form of Pink Diamond, then eats some shattered crystals, but before going through with her plan she places a gag order on Pearl to never reveal what happened. The Pearl gives Steven the phone as she goes to poo Pink, then he comes out of Pearl and reveals to everyone that Rose was Pink Diamond. Amethyst freaks out, but Garnet has a breakdown as Sapphire gets angry that Rose tricked them into a war. Pearl and Steven follows after Sapphire. She says that all their friends were shattered and corrupted in the war for nothing. Pearl explained that when Pink Diamond first got the Earth she was very bored and only got excitement from watching gems be born, but she wanted to see it in person, so she gave her the idea to disguise herself as one of them so she can greet her gems. She transforms into a rose and begins to mingle with the other gems and welcomes the amethyst to Earth. Before they were dispatched to do their duty, they begin to wander around the planet where they see many creatures already living and striving there. And this is when Rose realizes that if she invades the planet, all the life forms living there would become a statistic. She heads to the Diamond and tells them about the humans, so they decided to create a zoo for her. Then she says she wanted to leave, but they commanded her to stay. She went back home to become someone who the Diamonds couldn't command. She tries to scare Homeworld until they leave the planet, but when she saw a fusion between a ruby and a sapphire, Pink realizes that gems can have free will like humans and decided that she was not only fighting for Earth but for the freedom of gems. Sapphire realizes that she abandoned Ruby at home and goes back to find her, but she's gone. Steven finds Ruby chilling with Greg and eating pizza. She tells him that for the first time she's truly free to be who he wants on his own. Steven begins freaking out that Garnet is gone, but Ruby wants to work on herself. They go on a journey together to cross the open fields and camp out in the night. Steven tells Ruby that he likes who he's become, but Ruby reveals that he can't stop thinking of Sapphire. Steven goes home and tells her that Ruby is outside. She goes out to see the king on his steed as he walks to her and proposes. Sapphire agrees, so they finally get back together. Steven helps them plan their wedding, but Sapphire gets sad because most of her friends won't be able to make it, so Steven goes down and frees Bismuth. She awakened in a room filled with other bubble gems. Steven explains to her what happened, and after washing her face she took it surprisingly well. He tells her about the wedding, but she gets nervous because Steven didn't tell them that she's coming. He tells her to wait for his signal and goes down to announce that she's there, but Bismuth decides to exile herself to the forge instead. Bismuth says that they don't want her around because they chose to keep her bubbled. Steven tells her that he wants her to be a part of the crystal gems and heads back to introduce her. They're all surprised to see her and tackles to form a group hug, then Bismuth gives them a wedding present. The ceremony begins as Ruby rushes in to meet her bride. Steven reads the rites, then Ruby and Sapphire make their vows as Bismuth brings the ring, while Steven declares them married and they turn into Garnet. They hold an after party with all their friends in attendance, but Steven suddenly begins crying and they realize that the Diamonds are here to become wedding crashers. The ship goes over to look for the cluster, so it emerges and begins throwing hands with Yellow Diamond. Blue Diamond lands and emerges from her ship. Steven decides to go have a talk, but Blue only wants the smoke, so she uses Conquer's Hockey and makes all the gems fall to their knees. Connie tries to attack Blue, but she shatters the sword and prepares to wipe them out when Lapis comes back and reminds everyone who the strongest gem is. The Diamond tries to use her powers on Lapis, but she shrugs it off and restrains her. They begin ganging up on Blue and starts to overwhelm her and try to finish the fight with a combination attack while the cluster finishes off Yellow. Steven goes and thanks the cluster as it decides to go back to its bubble when Yellow suddenly emerges with Blue by her side. Steven goes and confesses that he is Pink Diamond, but they get enraged and play Step on Me Mommy. Steven awakens in the astral plane and sees that the gems have begun to lose. He goes over to the Diamonds to see them still grieving and tells them that if they stop the fighting he will explain everything. He wakes up to see all the Diamonds in front of him, then he explains what Pink did and how he was formed. Steven brings the Diamonds and attempts to heal a corrupted gem. At first it works, but as soon as they release their grip she reverts to being corrupted. Yellow Diamond says that the three of them together can't cure it, but if they had White Diamond it would work, so Steven decides to go for Rose's ship and makes a plan to go towards Homeworld to convince White to help them. He flies the ship out of space and lands the ship on homeworld. They exit the ship and see an army of gems assembled to greet them as an orb appears and reveals White's Pearl, who kidnaps Steven, carry him off to meet White Diamond. The goofy-looking creature White Diamond asks if Pink had fun playing her game, then locks Steven in his mom's room. Pearl comes in and frees Steven. He heads to see Yellow Diamond for help, but she tells him that White doesn't listen to anyone, then leaves for a mission, so he heads towards Blue Diamond, and she reveals that after Pink left they stopped talking to White Diamond. Pearl comes and tells Steven that in the old days Pink Diamond used to throw parties for the diamonds and all of them would get together, so he decides that he's going to plan one so he can speak to White Diamond. Steven sits to design his party when Blue suddenly arrives. She tells him that he's allowed to bring all his friends except for Garnet unless she defuses. Garnet refuses to do so and decides that she's not going to attend the party. The party begins with all the court coming to greet Steven before the diamonds arrive, but White Diamond's Pearl comes and announces that she can't make it to the event. Connie tries to cheer up Steven and they decide to go down and dance with the other gem, but they accidentally fuse to the surprise of everyone, who suddenly begins an orgy to the outrage of the Nazi diamonds that decides to put an end to it. They toss Stephanie into gem jail where they defuse and starts thinking of ways to escape. Steven decides to go to sleep and calls Bismuth for backup. He awakens in a melon Steven and decides to build a boat, but he doesn't know how, so the other melons come to help him to sail toward Bismuth. He travels through a storm that shatters his boat and leaves him stranded in the sea to rot away, but Loyal Lion comes in clutch to save his life by carrying him to Greg. He realizes that it's Steven and carries him to Bismuth, where he tells her that they need help before going back to his real body. Blue Diamond comes in and scolds Steven for his actions, but he tells her that it's normal to fuse when you love someone, and talk no jutsus her to his side, so she lets them out of jail and brings the couple to where his friends are being kept. They see Yellow Diamond waiting and she tells Blue to take Steven back to the tower, but she refuses and chooses to throw hands. Steven takes the chance to get his friends, but Yellow grabs them and pushes Blue out the tower. Yellow blasts Blue with shock therapy, but Steven stops her. He uses talk no jutsu on Yellow Diamond to make her see reason and defeats her mentally. The diamonds embrace, then try to free Steven from homeworld. They reach the spacecraft, but White's Pearl suddenly blocks them and activates White's ship to build a mech. Yellow and Blue Diamond's ship suddenly arrives and combos the craft as it's revealed that the crystal gems have come to save the day. The mech stands back up, but all the diamonds decide to attach their part to it and disable the robot. The diamonds begin to tell White that they need to change the way they do things, but she's immune to talk no jutsu and transforms them into puppets instead. The robot begins breaking apart, causing Steven to drop the gems. He goes over to all the gems and begins to fuse with each of them so they can retain their physical form. Sunfire begins climbing the robot but gets knocked away, so all the main gems decide to fuse and form Obsidian to defeat the kaiju. The fusion climbs the monster while everyone works together to damage it. They fuse their weapons to make a giant sword to disarm the mech, but she headbutts them into a wall, which causes them to defuse. The gems crawl into the eyes where they fall into White's chamber. She begins speaking through the other diamonds and says she can't allow Pink to leave because last time she caused so much trouble. She takes control of all the gems and scolds him for relying on them and tells Steven that without free will they are now perfect, but Steven says their flaws are who makes them who they are. White grabs him and removes his gem, but a pure gem Steven is formed instead of Pink, who attacks White Diamond and heads to rejoin his human body. White tries her best to stop them from merging again but fails to do so as they embrace each other and become Steven once more. White Diamond begins losing control and frees all the puppets she captured. Steven goes over and uses his ultimate move and talks no jutsu her to bring White over to his side. They return to Earth and make a pool to cure all of the corrupted gems to return them to as close to normal as possible. Then the diamonds leave to enslave other planets and genocide more lives, while the crystal gems chill on the beach to listen to Steven's song. This was a recap I wanted to make special because it's our 20th video. I hope you enjoyed, and if we get this video to 100 views, the community will get to pick the next recap, whether it be an anime movie or X-rated. Like the video if you liked the video, subscribe for more. Thanks for watching and remember to stay swifty.